So I realized we could have done this next story at the end, but I guess we'll talk about it now. It's maybe a nice break from lawsuits. So one of the other pieces of industry news is that Google has introduced as part, Gemini is their big AI tool, and has introduced something quite fascinating in that it is a CLI or command line interface version of an AI tool. And I had to go look. It's like I literally couldn't even process it. It's like, what does that even mean? And at least as I'm understanding it, it's literally while you're in the command line, um, that you can actually, I guess there's some kind of a denotation to trigger it, but you can basically interact with Gemini directly from the command line. Now, what's interesting about this is very clearly a play at developers and about at the enterprise, because most people today don't use command line interfaces unless you are pretty technical at this point. And so this is clearly targeting that audience. And so it was sort of a harkening back to a day. I mean, even most developers don't use a whole lot of command line. So it's really kind of, I mean, what was your take on this? Why are they doing this?
Well, I love how the hype around Gemini that Google puts around creating a Gemini command line interface is positioning itself for the next decade. And nothing says going to the future like the command line interface, CLI, that we grew up with, 40 years ago or whatever. But I think that outside of that, like you said, it's about the developers. Anthropic has already done a good job of providing Claude via CLI, and it's a good way for developers to be able to quickly test models and to iterate, as well as to provide a common interface for working with models and being able to get quick calls back. And there's always going to be a need for this foundational interface, whether it's the CLI or whether it's a CSV file. You want to have basic text and model and interface capabilities that you can work at a low level to be able to support experimentation. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm not as excited about it as Google is, but I see the
Well,
necessity.
what I find interesting about it as well is, and this is, I think we can take a couple of things from this. I mean, one, we've talked about the ubiquity of AI that is literally going to seep into everything, and I think this is an example of that. That AI will cease to be a product and barely even a feature. It'll simply just be a fundamental way that we execute and interact with our technology. It is getting rapidly to, and I've always loved this scene from Star Trek. If you remember back when it was the first Star Trek crew and they did the first set of movies, and they went back in time, and he was trying to interact with the computer by talking to it, like it had an AI interface, and the guy hands him the mouse and he holds the mouse up like, oh my gosh, I have to use it as a microphone because he thought he
Uh,
had to talk clearly. And I mean, I think we're rapidly reaching this point where AI is simply the ubiquitous way in which we interact with all of our technology. And I think this is an example of that, ironically enough, even when it's this very low level of interaction. But the other part I find really fascinating about this is that it's happening the exact same time we have this whole rise of vibe coding, which is moving the entire 180 degrees away from this idea of doing any coding at all, creating apps simply via prompt, and how somehow these simultaneously coexist. And I think that if I have a frustration with how people talk about AI and its application, they tend to talk in these sort of single streams, like it's all one direction. And the reality is we're seeing this. We're seeing all of this stuff happening all at once, simultaneously, and it's about sorting it all out and making sense of it all. So that was kind of my big takeaway as I chuckled at it, because I almost never use a command line interface for anything any longer, and so it's definitely a subset of folks that this is appealing to.
yeah, it's definitely becoming a very bifurcated split in the developer world. Everybody used to using libraries is now doing vibe coding, and then you have people doing the actual foundational work and having to create new and novel code and capabilities at a very deep level, CLI level, and assembly level. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure how that gap is going to be bridged at this point, because it seems like it's just two completely different separate directions.